Hi there! Let's talk about arithmetic word problems. So there are three basic types, which are ratios, proportions, and percents. So in a ratio, I've listed the three basic types. And the first one is my serving of fruit is 1/4 of the food spectrum. So what this is saying is that for every one serving of fruit, there are 4 servings in the food spectrum, so that's just 1 out of the 4. So we could say this in a fraction. Let's say 1 for the fruit, and then 4 for the whole food spectrum, so we know that's 1/4. This fraction tells us exactly what the fraction ratio should be. So the next one is, I have twice as many cookies as cupcakes. This is basically saying that for every 1 cupcake, you have 2 cookies. So if we can keep that, we could say for every 2 cookies, and we're going to write this in a verbal expression. So let's use the word 2. So it's a 2-to-1 ratio. And the last one is, my cousin earns $3 for every $5 I earn. So we could write this in the final type, which is a colon ratio. So let's do 3, which is your cousin, is compared to 5, which is how much you earn. Ooh, that's really elongated. Alright, so now that we've covered ratios, let's cover proportions, which are basically the next step of ratios, because proportions are an equation where 2 ratios equal each other. So let's take an example. Let's say your cookies. So you have twice as many cookies as cupcakes. But then, let's say, we could write this, let's say, in a fraction. So let's say you do have 2 cookies compared to 1 cupcake as your ratio, but your actual amount of cookies to cupcakes. Let's say you actually have 15 cupcakes, and you want to find out how many cookies you have. So you'd be solving for x. This is in a proportion because we can solve it by cross-multiplying. And you've probably learned this before. If not, what you have to do is cross-multiply by timesing 1 times x and 2 times 15, creating an equation like you normally see. So 2 times 15 equals 1 times x. And 1 times x is just x, so we can write it as x equals 15 times 2, which is 30. And we could have written this as 2 times 15, because if we know twice as many cookies, 15 times 2 is 30, so that's how we can double check our answer. So for the last one is percents. And percents are basically a ratio where the bottom number, the denominator, is out of 100, which is what percent means, out of 100. So if we wanted to write any of these out of 100, let's say I'll just make a new one. So let's say you have $100, and you have to give 15 of that to your business or tax. So that means you have 85. So that's how much money you get. And we can represent this as a actual percentage, as you all know. So we could say 85 out of 100. So because it's out of 100, we instantly know that it can be converted to 85%, because 85 out of 100 is 0.85. And if we want to convert it to a percent, we just move the decimal 2 places over to get a percentage. So out of all of this, you get ratios, proportions, and percents, and you now know that proportions and percents are just various forms of ratios. So now let's move on to actual problems. Now these 2 problems are a few of the examples of actual SAT problems, and some other examples include problems with length of a certain segment, a certain line segment, or let's say sizes of angles, or areas and perimeters of certain objects, normally rectangles, or even cylinders. And another really common one is distance equals rate times time problems, also known as DRT problems, such as the one in brown right here. This is a really common proportion problem. And another type is, let's say, numbers on a number line, comparing the distance away from those two. And there's a vast variety of many different type of problems you can use for the SAT. So let's get started with this one. The ratio of the length of a book to its width is 2 to 5. If the length of a book is 4, what is the perimeter? So we can take this and see the first ratio is 2 to 5 from length to width. So we can write this as a ratio immediately. So our first ratio would be 2 to 5. 2 over 5. And we want to set a proportion to solve for the missing length or width. So the other value we get is 4, and we know that's for the length. And if we set up this proportion correctly, the top part should be the length and the bottom part should be the width. So we know that the other side of this proportion, using the data that we have, the other side of the proportion would be 4. And since we don't have the width, we can use that as x to solve for it. And just like the previous example, we can cross multiply to solve for x. So now that we cross multiplied, we can solve by multiplying 2 times x, which is 2x, equal to 5 times 4, which is 20. And that would be equal to x equals 10. So what do we just solve for? We solved for the length, and knowing that, we can solve for the perimeter by multiplying 10 plus the width, which would be 4. So 4 plus 10 is 14. So 14 would be half the perimeter, so we have to times it by 2. So 2 times 14 equals 28. And the SAT normally gives these questions to trip people up into thinking, oh, well, x must be the answer since that's what I have and that's in the multiple choice. But they always go one step further into giving you a harder problem and a harder time. So let's get started with this last one. A car travels at 60 miles per 45 minutes. How far will it travel in 2 hours? We have to create a proportion given the data we have. So let's set this up. 60 miles over 45 minutes. And this is equal to, since we don't have miles, we can write that as x. And for the denominator, we have 2 hours. So it would be incorrect to say 2. Why is that incorrect, though? We have the data. Well, we know that 45 is in terms of minutes, and we have to keep this unit consistent. So if we have 2 hours, we have to convert that into minutes. So 2 hours would be 2 times 60, which is 120. So actually, we would have to write 120. And now we can solve for the missing mile length. We would solve by cross-multiplying. And now we can solve by completing the cross-multiplication. 45x equals 7,200. And if we divide by 45, x equals 160 minutes. Thank you for watching this tutorial, and this has been Ratios, Proportions, and Percents by SATFreePractice.com.